Cool. All right. So I built out some of the lab. We can kind of start by looking at some of the tests. I think the main thing that I heard was like challenging was just like the setup of stuff, like the imports, things like that. So I'm happy to take a look at it. I think the main thing just to kind of remember is everything is basically always starting from this backend folder. You know, so meaning that if you have a console here, you're going to run the console, right? If you do touch console.py, you're going to run the console, right? Python 3-i console.py from this backend folder. And if you run the tests, right, you'll run the tests from this backend folder. And what that means is, and the reason why that's very important is because with Python, you can see that even though I'm in this like models directory, right? I'm in the models directory, and I'm saying let's import movie. The way that I tell Python how to import movie is not from the actor file. It's not a relative path. It's not saying relative to the actor file, go to the movie file. Okay? Instead, what it's doing is saying relative to where you're going to run the Python program, right? Relative where you're going to run this. How do I get to the movie file, the movie class? And relative from here, you have to start. You just type ls. If you can't see it in your terminal, Python isn't going to see it either when you run PyTest or Python, right? So here to get to the movie file, it's API, models, and then movie. Okay, so that's kind of what I'm doing. From API.models, and I could do like from API.models.movie, import movie. It's the same thing. Give me 1 second. So yeah, it's the same thing with the tests. If you go to the tests, think about how we're running the tests from. We're running the tests from the backend folder, and then we'll run PyTest, right? So notice, I guess I typed this in wrong. I typed in move, apparently. Let's actually read this error message. Actor.py, line 2, from API models.move, and it's saying no module this. So I can just click here, probably, right? And this is getting called from this test actor.py file, line 4. It's importing the actor file, and then apparently in the actor file, it's trying to import movie, and that doesn't exist. So let's click on this, right? And there's the error. Okay. So what I was saying was same thing when you're running the tests, right? When I'm running the tests, I'm running it from the backend folder. So when I run that, we got our on purpose kind of import error, but actually everything here is passing. The reason why it's passing is meaning everything is importing properly. The reason why is because I'm doing from api.lib.db, from api.models.actor, right? So everything still is relative to where I'm calling from, right? I'm running PyTest here, and it's from api.models, right? Models, and then the actor file. If you then decide, hey, let's run the test, cd tests from here, and we're closer, and I run PyTest from here. This is now, actually I would have thought this broke before that. Let's see if let's do one more and cd models. Yeah, it actually doesn't break as early as I would have thought. I'm surprised it's even able to say from api.models. Somehow it seems like it is going backwards and seeing it, but oftentimes it won't do that. Let me see. Let's try to just run this actor.py file. All right. So go into API, models, Python 3-i, actor.py. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So I'm running this. All right. I'm inside the models directory, and then it's right away breaking. It's saying, hey, there is no module. You say go import from api.lib.db, but it's saying, I don't know what you're talking about. This module doesn't exist, or I can't find it, right? And the reason why is because, well, if you again, you have to type ls and see the perspective. So it can't see it from here. Now, it's not a good idea to then go and say, okay, I'll go fix this by running the actor.py file and then changing this to say like from dot movie, right? From dot movie import movie. The reason why that's a bad idea is because when eventually you're going to try to run the console, right? So you have to take the perspective of the console. You're going to run the tests, right? So you're going to have to take the perspective of the tests file, and once you do that, right? If you change that and then you run PyTest and you say from dot movie import movie, it obviously doesn't see it here, right? It doesn't see the dot movie file right here. So I ran PyTest here, and then it calls this file. It's going to break. All right. So instead, what we do is we set everything up so that we're kicking off our code always from the same directory. So from api.models.movie. Okay. All right. Lots of times the configuration part is also in this same kind of like project directory, right? This backend folder. So you can see my settings.py file, is in this same thing, right? Kind of like the project directory. Like you'll see that with lots of like the configuration setup type stuff. For instance, like the requirements.txt is another example here, right? Eventually, if we define the manage.py file, right, which is going to, like from API import create app. We didn't write this function yet, but, right, we'll do something like this, and we'll do app.run. The reason why we have it set up this way is for the same reason. So I get to boot up my Flask app from the same folder where I run my tests, from the same folder where I run my console. And the reason for that is because this way we always are keeping the same perspective. We always have the same import path. Start from the backend folder, right? And say how to get there. All right, so that's that idea. Now, questions about that kind of stuff, like the next thing I was going to go through was the circular import and then like the module level import stuff. So okay, well, we can go into there and see if any questions emerge. So if I run these tests, what is it? Right, I think it's this test actor.py. Let's take a look at it. So press Command P, which allows me to like search the files, and then this runs this test actor.py. I'm running it from here, the same backend folder. So that's why everything's imported from API. It's importing each of these lines, right? Import actor, import movie. We'll probably get into our error probably by here, because what's happening is if you go to the actor file, this is saying from api.models import the movie class. So that will take us over to the movie module. And then the movie module, it says from api.models import the actor, right? And that'll take us back to actor, which says go back to movie, right? And then that's the circular import issue. So let's run this. Okay, so there we got it. We got our circular import. Just to see how you can read this, right? It says cannot import this. It's breaking in movie.py line 1. Why did it call it movie.py line 1? Because of this actor.py line 2. Why did it call actor.py line 2? Because of this test to actor.py file, right, over here in line 4. Okay? So if you just read this tells a story, of like how this whole thing started, like the story of your bug. So yeah, you just, do take some time just to read the error message. Cool. So, how will we fix this? So I showed this before. Basically, the way to do this is we want to do something like this. From API, we'll do like import api.models as models. So basically just importing the package, right? When it's a folder with an init file, that's the package. And then we'll do, instead of import that movies, or that movie class, and even going to that module, we'll say just import the package, and from the package, import models.movie. And then we'll do the same thing in movie. We'll say from API.models, import, we'll say import API.models as models, and then we'll say build from vector models.actor. Then I'll run this. This should break as well. Let's see if we can figure out why. Okay, beautiful. So it says, by the way, if we want to clear this out, like just to like focus your brain a little bit, right? Remember, we can run the pytest-x just to fail at the first test. So let's do that. Okay, and what we're getting is, 2 tests pass, but then we get to this line 43. Test movie actors finds the associated movies. So it's calling our actor.movies method, which actually takes me to the actor.movies method. That should be here. So it's calling this. And then it's saying module build from record models.movie, and this is probably where it's breaking, right? If you're not sure, you can always put a breakpoint here, and then again, like reproduce the bug, meaning call the line of code until you figure out exactly which words are triggering the bug, right? Or reproducing the error message. And that way you can isolate and be like, this is what I need to focus on. So here it's telling us a pretty good error message module API.models has no attribute movie. So why is that, right? If we kind of can see it in this folder, right? But the reason why, of course, is because we're importing something from the package, and you can only, if you're going to access something directly from the package, it has to be defined in the init file. So if you see an error like this, we should be like, okay, where's the models init file? And take a look there. And this is blank, right? So now what we need to do is just define this here. Like we could just define a movie class here, and I guess it would import it. But instead what we want to do is actually get to this one. So you can say import. You can do the same kind of structure from API.models.movie. Oh, sorry, I'll do it this way. From API.models.movie, import movie. And then from API.models. I'll just do it here. That's fine for now. I'm gonna run this. And now, I must have a breakpoint in here or something. I'm not sure where I am. It looks like I'm here, line 21. Let's just command click on it. Oh, I did have a breakpoint here. Weird. Oh, I left it here. So now, we should, like I said, if you want to, try to see if this fixed it, I can just call this. And see that now we're able to access it. Why can we access it? Because we're importing from the models package, and now the models package has this movie. Okay. From API.models. And then we can just do the next one. .actor, import actor. And then, probably in the movie, we can just do the corresponding one, right? A movie has many actors. And here we'll say import API.models as models. And we call the models.actor. And we should be able to get this because if you go here, notice, look at that. Like, it's kind of nice. If I click on models, command click on models, it just takes me directly to the init file because it kind of knows that's where this stuff is defined, right? It says, okay, look for it here. Right, and that's where it exists. Okay, so I know this can be confusing to some people. I remember someone had asked me for an example of this. Like, one example of this is like the pandas. If you just think of like the pandas library that we've been using, right? Think of how we use pandas. What we do is we do something like this. We go, import pandas as PD, right? That's pretty similar to our from import API.models as models, right? Import, what are we importing? And then call it something. And then what do? We say PD dot, data frame, for example, meaning call this function, which is defined on the PD package. So what you should kind of imagine is that there's probably in pandas, there must be an init function. So like here's pandas, and then here's our init.py function, or sorry, our init.py file. And this is where it's deciding, this is a very large code base. It has tests, it has, lots of kind of things. Here it's deciding what do I want to make available to those, to a user who's importing pandas, right? Whatever I think should be available, I'm going to place in that init file some way or the other, make accessible here. Okay, so you can see it's like using some code in order to make this stuff available. It's not doing it directly, but here it is importing actually a bunch of things directly into this init file. So the same type. So like, why does this init file exist? The idea is, a package is going to have a lot of, there's going to be a lot of code in this folder. You're deciding what do people kind of need to know about? Like, what are they going to be using? All right. If you import this folder, what are the types of classes or functions that a person may want to use? That's what you would make kind of available at the package level. The same way Pandas is doing that, here, right? They're making this data frame available at the package level. All right, that's the way this works. Questions about that stuff? No, any other questions? Other questions about like setup stuff? I think the next thing I was going to do was just build out the Flask app a little bit, and then maybe go through the test for the Flask app. I know there are some questions about that. It is a little confusing, but I can do my best to explain that. And then what's next for you all to work on is the next thing asks you really to, so I can deploy the solution, but the next thing is then to ask you guys to write, like build another resource for this Flask app, like build out like the writer's routes in a writer model, and do that from scratch without any help of tests, and also write the corresponding tests, right? So again, it's like doing the work of building out, writing out this code and feeling comfortable with it. Okay, so what's next? So next is then to build out the Flask app. The Flask app, typically you put that at the package level of the API folder. Why? Because again, if your init function kind of defines what are you making available, right? There's like a lot of code in your code base, but what is the code that you want to make available, right? That's defined in the init, right, at the package level. So for this, the idea is we define this create app. I'd actually have to look at the test to remember what arguments it takes. I think it takes like the DB name, DB user, maybe DB password, but I can't remember. Let's take a look. So models, test app.py, app, create app. So what does it take? Yeah, this is the DB name, DB password, DB user, right? So these are the arguments, right? My test is going to call my function, and it's going to call my create app function, right? It's importing it from API, and then return the Flask app. All right. So let's see. So def create app will take those three arguments. And then, I mean, there's different ways you can do it. I'll still import Flask here, I think. From Flask, import Flask. I'll build the app. Right, pass through the name. Call that app. And then basically what we need to do, I think there's that, always forget this, app.config, is it from mapping? And then from there, right, you can define, like the DB name equals the DB name that's passed through, and the DB user equals the DB user that's passed through, and the DB password equals the DB password. You didn't have to do it this way, but I mean, I think actually the tests encourage you to do it this way, but if you were able to work around this, that's fine with me. So, and then the next thing is to define the routes actually like on this application in this create app function, right? So let's just do it for whatever the first one is that I asked us to do. So build records, so this is some setup, create / and then /actors. So we'll do it here. At app.route / so when you go here, def home, and then we'll just return welcome to the movies API. And now what should occur? So the test probably actually works fine, but to show you what we should probably do, actually it won't work fine. Anyone see the error? Let's run the test and see what happens. I'm guessing this is all going to break. So let's do Python, PyTest, test app. Let's just take another look at it. See if you see the error. Okay, well this wasn't what I was expecting. Cannot import name movie from api.models.actor. Well, that makes sense. Where's that getting called? In API models init.py test app. API.models init.py. Let's click on that. From API.models. Oh, I switched these up. Okay, let's see if we can get any further. Run the test again. Can I import name movie actor from API.models? So I guess it's assuming that this is here. So how do we fix this? Just do from API.models. Right, this is on my test file. Test app.py line 7 is trying to import this from the package, but it's not there. So .models.movie actor, import the movie actor class, and then run it again. Okay, beautiful. This is what I was expecting. It's hard for me to read, it's like overkill. It feels like it's yelling at me too much. So I like to just do the -x just to get yelled at once. So now we get this create app, IMDb test, Postgres. Okay, and here it says none type object has no attribute app context. So this is like our classic error, right? Which is we're calling a method on an object. Doesn't matter that it's a Flask app. It's still a method on an object. And it's saying this object has no attribute app context. But the real problem is, of course, the type that exists. So if it says none type, where does the none type come from? Well, Flask app is the return value, right? Must be the return value of this. So if we're getting back none, that must mean that we have no return value here, right? So it expects to return the actual Flask app, right? You can see that, right? The tests really tell you what to do. So that's what it's expecting. So we should go to the init file, and you can see this function, right, has no return value. So let's return app. So the way this works is that we're defining. You can imagine if we did not have this here, right? We just have the app. We set up the config. We have the route, right? And then that's kind of it. But inside here, like inside this function, it might feel weird that we're defining another function and this function has a return value, but that just happens to be valid in Python. So as long as you kind of, keep your tabbing fine, right? This return value is associated with this function, and then this return value is associated with the create app function. All right, cool. And I guess I had a key error for DB user. The user should be called DB user. What do I call it? Oh, I need to keep these consistent. DB user, DB password, and database. So this key error is coming from the config, right? And this works just like a dictionary. So it's just saying, hey, you did not set a key of DB user on the config, and here I'm trying to retrieve a key of DB user. So we just should be consistent with this. So that would go here. DB user is capital DB user. DB password is capital DB password. DB name is actually database, which is fine. All right, and let's just run this again. Okay, and now we have one passing. The one passing one was this this thing right here. Welcome to the movies API. So then the next thing is this actors one. So let's do the actors one, and then I think maybe that will be it. Then I'll just show you how to connect to boot up the Flask app. So client.get actors. So this is saying, maybe this is a good time to go through some of these tests. All right, so let's take a look at this. We call this test. Test actors index displays the name and ID of each actor. All right. This has, right, these two arguments, app and client. These are arguments to the test itself, right? Not to the underlying functions, but to the test, which means that these are two fixtures. The reason why there's two is because this is specifying in order. It's saying first call this fixture and then call this fixture. All right. So the first fixture it calls is app. So basically we're looking for a function called app that's decorated by like a fixture. And here we find it, right? This is a function called app decorated by a fixture. And we can see this. So the first thing that happens before it runs any of the tests is it creates our Flask app, and then it calls this Flask app.app context. This, unfortunately, this is probably the most confusing part. I can maybe talk about that in a second. It calls this getDB function that creates a cursor, which returns a connection object, calls a cursor, drops the tables, right? Resets basically the state of our database, recreates our records, calls build records. Build records, if you command click on this, right, it just takes you here. So it sets up all your data, right? So I just use functions to clean up my tests as well. This way you can see that even this kind of reads like a story. And if you want to see the details of any of these, you can just command click and like read the details. Then we commit our changes because we changed our database. Then we yield the Flask app, meaning that we go back to the test. So we go back to like this test, and then actually what we do is we go to the next thing, I believe, right here. Yeah, we must. So now we call this fixture. This takes the app that was just created. So it takes the Flask app, and it calls app.testClient. What this does, if you look at our app, we just created a normal Flask app, right? Create app, return it, assign it to here. When you call app.testClient, basically the main thing that it does, right, and this is what is our client, main thing that it does is it gives you access to this client.get. It gives you access to the .get method. And the .get method allows you to mimic a call to your API, right? Normally, the way we make a call to our API is by booting up the server, have it listening for something, go to the browser, right? Somehow trigger the call. Instead, the test client, basically returns a copy of your app, but it gives you also this functionality where for the purpose of a test, you can call, you make a request to one of the routes, to any of your defined routes. So that's why we use this. This just does one thing. It just returns a copy of our app that allows us to make requests. Then finally, after building the app, after then getting that copy that allows us to call the requests, then we finally make a request to /actors, and then this should return some data. And what this is saying is it should return basically a list of length 2. And if you go through each of the elements in the list, they should have a key of name that has like Tim Robbins. So it's a list of dictionaries with at least a key of name and Tim Robbins. That's basically it. So in order to do that, what we should do is do something like, look at me. Let's not copy and paste, right? From my own rules. So app.route /actors. And then we can do def actors. And what do we want to return? We want to return basically the list of the actors. Now, you could, technically you could, I guess, you could try to write out the query here, cursor.execute, select all from actors. But remember, this is kind of violating our model view controller rule, right? We want these calls, like whenever you see yourself writing a SQL call, just be conscious it should occur like from the model layer. Or, in a more complicated code base, it could be a little different. But for us, at least, it should not be occurring from the controller. You want to call from like the model or the ORM type layer. So we actually have, I think in the ORM, or I guess it's in db.py, we have a function that allows us to do that, right? And that's this find all method that takes a class and the connection. Right? So let's just say from DB. Oh, from DB, but really it should be, again, like keeping that same path, right, from this folder. Everything, we're going to run everything from this folder, right? And PyTest is always run from this folder too. So it'll be from api.lib.db import find all. Find all. Okay. And then this class is really the actor class, and that should be the same type of thing from api.models. You could just do this from api.models import actor, right? And that's fine, I think, because this is defined at that package. And now this connection, right, is not defined. We could use that using our getDB function, I think is what we're kind of supposed to do. We can see that in a second. And that might be good. And then that returns actors. And now for each actor, basically for each actor, we would call the toJSON method. That was the idea for actor. Right, this will return to me a bunch of actor instances. And for actor in actors, you would call something like actor.toJSON. I think this takes, I forget if it takes the cursor or the connection. Let's see what this takes. Find all takes the connection and then calls connection.cursor. So this probably we can define the same way to take a connection object. Let see the question. Is there a downside to doing import star? Very good question. I think yes. The downside is this. Let's say we have two files from api.lib.db and from api.lib.orm. And now we import star from both of them. Remember, like the more complicated your code and your code base becomes, this can start to become, longer. Okay? So now you go, all right, we're going to call this find all method. The question is like, where did the find all method come from? Did it come from this library or this library? And just remember, like, there could be a lot of these. And this could be something that you're unfamiliar with. So it's nicer if you have a breadcrumb, right? So I like just doing find all. The other thing is it keeps your code base smaller. Like if you have this, you're now saying how many functions you have to worry about in the DB file. Like how many functions are potentially used in this module? Every one that's defined here, right? So now your code base, even though it looks small, is technically a lot bigger in terms of the amount of stuff you may need to worry about when reading and understanding this code. But if you just scope it, what was it called? Find all. Now you only added one function basically to your file, and that's kind of a constant battle when you're building code, is to try to keep your code base, even though it's large, try to make it feel small by like limiting what each file is doing, right? And then what each function is doing, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, and then in Python, people just say, explicit is better than implicit. I think this is like the credo or something of Python. Cool. So yeah, I prefer this. And then, okay, so then we call this toJSON method, and then this should, if we click on the actor class, basically we'll need an instance method. Let's get rid of this. That does def toJSON, I need self, pass the connection, and then basically we'll take, I don't know exactly what I asked for here, but self.underdict will retake the instance and return a dictionary of it, right? And then that will probably pass the test, right? I'm not sure if it'll pass the toJSON test, but it'll probably pass my this one, because my init is calling toJSON in each of these, and that's a list of dictionaries now, because this converts each instance into a dictionary. Let's see. Nope, it doesn't pass it, does it? Let's see. JSON.loads. Client, can I read this? Their internal server error. The server was unable to complete your request. So let's see, client.get/actors, app.route/actors. Just want to make sure this is exactly right. What I could do at this point, actually, what I probably would do, oh, and look at this, getDB is not defined. And that's in init.py line 20. So we finally did see the error message. So made the call, it seems like, to that actors, but then it broke down here. So that makes sense. getDB is probably defined in this DB file, I think. Let's click on it. There it is, getDB. So let's go here and go back to the init.py file, and then here's my getDB, and now this should be defined. And it still breaks, and it's because, see if we can read the error message, 16.9, still error, unable to complete a request, type error. Okay, the view function did not return a valid response. The return type, this is pretty explicit, right? The view function, which is what we called these kinds of functions, did not return a valid response. The return type should be string, dictionary, tuple, but it was a list. So I bet you if we just do JSONify, it'll probably be good. And then we'll say, where does the JSONify come from, right? It comes from this, from the Flask library itself. And I got 2 passing. Okay. So this is now passing. And look, if you read this part, it says the requested URL was not found on the server. So this is for the next test. This is when it goes to /movies. We get back basically this HTML. The requested URL was not found on the server. So that's in, so basically you can that makes sense, right? We just haven't defined it. All right, let's see if I can explain this getDB thing, which really means, can I explain this app context? If you don't understand this, in the end of the day, it's not a huge deal. It's not the most important thing. But just to maybe fill in another gap, notice I'm doing this with Flask app.app context. Basically what you're saying is, for all the lines of code that we're running inside of here, do that using this Flask app that you just created as what's called the current app. Okay? Now, what does that mean? So if you go to this, so right now when we call getDB, we are inside the current app, which is this Flask app. So what does that mean? It means that this DB, the return value here, right, is going to come from this file. In this file, here we make use of this current app thing. This is not something that I defined. Current app comes from the Flask library itself. Okay? And again, what this means is, if I'm inside this app context, all right, the current app is this application. Why does that matter? Because on this application, we said that we're going to have a config, right? We're basically setting this dictionary. We just did app.config and basically assigned a dictionary that has this like database, right? This key value pair of the database is this database name, DB user, DB password. And then we retrieve it when we go to here. We get back the current app's config, the DB user, DB password database. So where do these values come from? They come from, when I call getDB, notice there's no argument to the method, right? It comes from this current app's config, and that comes from here. The fact that I've defined this Flask app, and this Flask app has set these values. All right. The reason why this is useful is because then, like kind of independently, we're going to call the API, we'll call /getActors, and what do we want, like how am I going to pass, the test database to like this get method? Like it doesn't really make sense. The way that we do it is by down here, we again make use of the getDB. So what is this? Again, it's the current app, right? So it's the app that was set here, meaning that it will return when we go kind of pull out that config data, IMDb test Postgres, it'll pull out that, right, the current app.config, IMDb Postgres, right, and that it will have the same kind of credentials. That's the idea. Why is that important? Because, in the tests, we want getDB to give me this test credentials, which are set in this test app file. But later, or let's do it now, we're also going to run from development, right? And here, how do we want this stuff run? From the development, from development, and here we'll pass through, I forget the name of my database. I think I might have IMDb development. Yeah, it looks like I do, and that has tables, and just do select actors, select start from actors. Yeah, so that looks pretty good. Okay, so now we can just, from here, like when I run this, I'm not passing through my test app credentials, my test database credentials. I'm passing through my database credentials. Why? Because if I use I'll just show you. Let's use the test one. IMDb test. Okay, Postgres. So let's say I want to check out my app in development, right? It's a good way to debug too. It is see what's actually going on. And then we'll do debug equals true. And then we'll just run this. Ugh, no module named Flask. Why is that? Let me deactivate this. I'm not sure which thing I'm using. It's probably from something else. But if it's saying no module named Flask, it means basically, right, my first fix would be to run the requirements.txt. I think it was because I had an environment activated that didn't have that library installed. So let's just try it one more time. Oh, still happened. Okay, let's do this perhaps the right way. We could, right, how would we do this? You can run a Python 3-m venv, right? This is running the venv module, and then setting this, and setting the name to venv. And then, right, this creates this venv folder, and that folder has this bin folder in it. So I'll do source venv bin activate, right? And that kind of activates this. And then we'll do pip3 install -r the requirements.txt, and then run this. And then that should, I hope, have my Flask library in it. It does look like, here it is, for collecting Flask, downloading Flask, etc. And there we go. And now let's run this again. Okay, so now we're booted up, serving it. Go here. This is my root directory. And then I forget if we went to movies or actors. Okay, apparently it was actors. Okay, no data. Why is there no data? Right? This is not helpful. It looks like we made a mistake. But really what's going on is we connected to the test database. And remember, our test database, we always like to keep clean after we run a test. Meaning that, right, after the last thing we do, after, in the fixture, we run the eventually we'll run the test, but then afterwards we'll drop all the tables, right, delete everything. So when you then connect, if you then connect to the test database, it has nothing in there, right? It's all clean, as it should be. So what we should be doing instead is use our development database. So this needs to go to IMDb development, and then that is good, I think. And now we reboot, right, and everything's connected. Everything looks okay. Right, so what's happening here is this is going here, getting the database connection. That would be my current app. I guess it knows that this current app is now, the app that I'm, currently using, which has set this config stuff as these credentials that we're passing through, and then setting it here. Right, and then because this getDB is using these credentials and returning everything appropriately. All right, so that's that. So again, kind of the way that we do this, that we define our Flask app, is we oftentimes you'll place it in the init file because this is just like organized to it's like almost like convention lots of times to show you, hey, this is the most important part of the application, right? And so if I'm going to define this package, I'm defining it by this function, the create app function. And this defines all my routes. So it's like a good starting point to explore your code base if you care about this API. And then, but we can't call this init function, right? Like because we want to keep everything at the same level. We want to keep everything from this backend level. So we use the manage.py file to import, just from an API, import the one thing defined on it, which is create app, set it up. This create app returns an app object, right? And then, run it from here. And that's kind of it. I think that's mainly what I wanted to cover. We can take a look more at these tests. But I think we're pretty good. I don't know. Other questions about this lab? Y'all feel pretty comfortable to like write some tests? Yeah. Yeah, you'll give it a shot. For that, like obviously, I mean you can try it. You can try to not look at this, but then you can quickly look at this. That's okay. My guess is these are technically integration tests. There are other kinds of integration tests where like you kind of actually it's kind of cool. It like clicks around the browser for you if you have forms. But these are integration tests. The reason why they're integration tests is because this normally with our what's called there's two different kinds of tests, right? There's unit tests and integration tests. I guess there's more than that, but these are the main kinds over here. Unit tests and integration tests. Unit tests teach tests like they're like isolated. In other words, they test an individual function. So you can see that, right? If we have the movies function, the corresponding tests just test this one function, right? There's no other functions really being tested. Maybe this one, I guess, is dependent on it. The integration test, however, tests kind of the full cycle, right? Test something like broader. So what do I mean by that is, what is it testing? It's testing that when you make a request to /actors, it returns the result. But think about all the steps that have to occur, for this, right? This one step means that, like this route is set up properly and that this function is defined and returns something valid. It means that we call the find all function. So this find all function also has to be working. It means that we're returning the proper JSON form. So it's integration, right? We're testing that these different pieces are integrated, right? That they all work together. So you're testing like more of like the flow of what's occurring. Okay, so like the integration test is kind of like a specific feature. For us, a feature is anything that like provides end user value, and here the end user is someone using the API. So this is like a full feature, right? They make a request here, they get back a response. We're testing that feature works, not just the individual components to get to it, but that the full feature works when we do something like make a request to /actors. Cool. All right.